The phone call that would entangle Frank Sinatra in Hollywood's most dangerous love triangle came on a warm evening in March 1961. Marilyn Monroe was calling from her Brentwood home, her voice soft and vulnerable, in a way that made Frank's heart race. "Frank, I need to see you. Can you come over?" Frank had known Marilyn for years, but something in her voice that night was different. She wasn't calling as a friend or colleague. She was calling as a woman who needed something only he could provide. What began that night would become one of Hollywood's most whispered about affairs, connecting three of the most powerful figures in American culture: Frank Sinatra, Marilyn Monroe, and President John F. Kennedy. The relationship would remain secret for decades, but it would change all their lives and ultimately contribute to one of the most tragic endings in entertainment history. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. 1954, 1960. The Foundation. Frank Sinatra and Marilyn Monroe had known each other since 1954, when both were rising stars navigating the complex world of Hollywood. They moved in the same circles, attended the same parties, and shared the same struggles with fame, relationships, and the constant pressure of public scrutiny. But their relationship in the 1950s was purely professional and social. Frank was married to Ava Gardner, then later involved with various other women. Marilyn was married to Joe DiMaggio, then Arthur Miller. They were friends who respected each other's talent and understood each other's challenges. Frank always treated Marilyn with respect, recalled a mutual friend. In a town where men often saw Marilyn as just a sex symbol, Frank saw her as a serious actress and a complex person. Frank had watched Marilyn struggle with the Hollywood system that tried to reduce her to a blonde stereotype. He understood her frustration because he'd faced his own typecasting early in his career. Marilyn, meanwhile, admired Frank's artistic integrity and his refusal to compromise his principles for commercial success. She saw in Frank the kind of authenticity she was trying to achieve in her own career. Early 1961. The political connection. Everything changed when Frank became involved in John F. Kennedy's presidential campaign and subsequent administration. Through his friendship with Peter Lawford, who was married to Kennedy's sister Pat, Frank gained access to the highest levels of American political power. President Kennedy was a frequent guest at Frank's Palm Springs compound, and Frank took pride in hosting the leader of the free world. These gatherings often included Hollywood's biggest stars, creating a unique blend of politics and entertainment. It was at one of these parties in early 1961 that Frank allegedly introduced Marilyn Monroe to President Kennedy. The meeting was brief and seemingly innocent, just another celebrity introduction at another Hollywood gathering. But according to sources close to both Frank and Marilyn, something sparked between the president and the actress that night, and Frank, perhaps unknowingly, had facilitated one of the most dangerous attractions in American political history. March 1961. The Call. The phone call from Marilyn in March 1961 came just weeks after her introduction to President Kennedy. When Frank arrived at her Brentwood home that evening, he found Marilyn in a state he'd rarely seen: vulnerable, confused, and emotionally fragile. "I need someone I can trust," Marilyn told him. "Someone who understands what it's like to live in this fishbowl." Frank and Marilyn spent that evening talking about fame, loneliness, and the price of being constantly in the public eye. By the time Frank left her house the next morning, their relationship had fundamentally changed. Frank and Marilyn understood each other in a way that was rare in Hollywood, said a friend who knew them both. They were both incredibly talented people who felt misunderstood by the world around them. Their affair began that night, conducted in absolute secrecy, Frank would visit Marilyn at her home, always arriving and leaving discreetly. Marilyn would occasionally visit Frank's compound in Palm Springs, but only when they could be certain of privacy. Spring-summer 1961. The secret romance. Frank and Marilyn's relationship during 1961 was passionate but complicated. Both were dealing with their own personal and professional challenges, and both were involved with other people. Frank with various women, Marilyn, reportedly, with President Kennedy. The affair was conducted with the kind of secrecy that only seasoned Hollywood professionals could manage. They used intermediaries to arrange meetings, communicated through trusted friends, and were never photographed together in compromising situations. Marilyn was happier during that period than I'd seen her in years, recalled her friend and photographer Milton Green. She was involved with someone who truly understood her, who valued her mind as much as her beauty. Frank, meanwhile, found in Marilyn someone who matched his own complexity and intensity. She wasn't intimidated by his fame or power, and she challenged him intellectually in ways that few women had. But their relationship was also fraught with the kind of drama that seemed to follow both of them. Marilyn's alleged involvement with President Kennedy created a triangle that Frank found increasingly difficult to navigate. Fall 1961. The complications. By late 1961, Frank was becoming aware that his role in introducing Marilyn to President Kennedy had created complications he hadn't anticipated. Rumors about Marilyn's relationship with the president were beginning to circulate, and Frank found himself caught between his friendship with Kennedy and his feelings for Marilyn. The situation became more complex when Frank realized that Marilyn was seeing both him and the president, often within days of each other. While Frank had never expected exclusivity, the political implications of the triangle were becoming dangerous for everyone involved. Frank was torn, said a close friend. He cared about Marilyn, he respected Kennedy, and he understood that this situation could destroy all of them if it became public. Frank began to distance himself from the triangle, reducing his contact with both Marilyn and the president. But Marilyn interpreted this as rejection, and her emotional state began to deteriorate. Winter 1961 to 1962. The warning signs. By early 1962, Marilyn's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. She was struggling with prescription drug addiction, depression, and the pressure of keeping her alleged relationship with the president secret. Frank was one of the few people who recognized how dangerous Marilyn's situation was becoming. He tried to convince her to seek help for her drug addiction and to distance herself from the political complications that were consuming her life. Marilyn, you need to get clean and get out of this mess, Frank reportedly told her during one of their last private conversations. This isn't going to end well for any of us. But Marilyn was too deep into the triangle to extract herself easily. She had become emotionally dependent on the excitement and validation of her alleged relationship with the president, and she couldn't face the prospect of returning to a normal life. Frank's attempts to help were complicated by his own involvement in the situation. He had introduced Marilyn to Kennedy. He had his own relationship with her, and he was trying to maintain his friendship with the president while protecting Marilyn from herself. May 1962, the breaking point. The crisis came to a head in May 1962, when Marilyn famously sang Happy Birthday to President Kennedy at Madison Square Garden. The performance, with its breathy delivery and obvious sexual implications, made their alleged relationship impossible to ignore. Frank watched the performance on television from his Palm Springs home, and he knew immediately that everything was about to change. The song was Marilyn's public declaration of her feelings for the president, and it would force all of them to confront the reality of their situation. That performance was Marilyn's way of forcing the issue, said a Hollywood insider who knew all three parties. She was tired of being a secret, and she was demanding recognition, even if it destroyed everything. Within days of the Madison Square Garden performance, both Frank and President Kennedy began distancing themselves from Marilyn. The political risks had become too great, and neither man could afford to be associated with her publicly. Summer 1962. The isolation. Marilyn spent the summer of 1962 increasingly isolated and desperate. Her alleged relationships with both Frank and President Kennedy had effectively ended, and she found herself alone with her addiction, her mental health issues, and her shattered dreams of public recognition. Frank tried to maintain some contact with Marilyn during this period, but their conversations were increasingly difficult. Marilyn would call him at all hours, often incoherent from prescription drugs, begging him to help her or to restore their relationship. Marilyn was drowning, and she was reaching out to anyone who might save her, said a friend. But Frank couldn't save her without destroying himself, and I think that knowledge was eating him alive. Frank's final conversation with Marilyn allegedly took place just days before her death. According to sources, she called him in a state of complete despair, talking about ending her life and asking him to remember her kindly. Frank reportedly begged Marilyn to check herself into a treatment facility and to seek help for her addiction and depression. But Marilyn was beyond help at that point, and Frank was powerless to save her. August 5th, 1962. The tragedy. When Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Brentwood home on August 5th, 1962, Frank was performing in Lake Tahoe. The news reached him just before he was scheduled to go on stage, and witnesses said he was visibly shaken. Frank canceled his remaining shows and flew back to Los Angeles immediately. He was one of the few major celebrities to attend Marilyn's funeral, sitting quietly in the back of the chapel and leaving immediately after the service. The official cause of Marilyn's death was ruled a probable suicide by barbiturate overdose. But the circumstances surrounding her death fueled conspiracy theories that persist to this day. Frank never publicly discussed his relationship with Marilyn or the events leading up to her death. Frank was devastated by Marilyn's death, said longtime friend Jilly Rizzo. He felt responsible, even though there was nothing he could have done to save her. He carried that guilt for the rest of his life. 1962-1998. The silence. Frank never spoke publicly about his relationship with Marilyn Monroe, or the triangle that may have contributed to her death. When asked about Marilyn in interviews, Frank would simply say that she was a talented actress who died too young. But people close to Frank said the experience changed him fundamentally. He became more protective of the women in his life and more wary of the dangerous intersections between politics, entertainment, and personal relationships. Frank's relationship with President Kennedy also cooled after Marilyn's death. While they maintained public cordiality, the friendship never recovered from the complications of 1961-1962. Frank learned that some secrets are too dangerous to keep, and some triangles are too complex to navigate, said a friend who knew him for decades. Marilyn's death taught him that fame and power can be deadly when they're mixed with genuine emotion. The legacy. The alleged relationship between Frank Sinatra, Marilyn Monroe, and President Kennedy remains one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. While much of the story is based on rumors and circumstantial evidence, the emotional truth of their triangle reflects the dangerous intersection of entertainment and politics in the early 1960s. Frank's involvement in Marilyn's final months illustrates how even the most powerful people can be powerless to save someone who is determined to destroy themselves. It also shows how personal relationships can become collateral damage when they intersect with political power. Marilyn's death marked the end of an era of innocence in American entertainment and politics. The tragedy demonstrated that fame, beauty, and talent are no protection against addiction, mental illness, and the crushing pressure of living in the public eye. For Frank, Marilyn's death was a reminder that actions have consequences, that introductions can change lives, and that some secrets are too heavy for anyone to carry alone. The story of Frank, Marilyn, and JFK continues to fascinate because it combines three of the most iconic figures of the 20th century in a triangle that perfectly captures the glamour, danger, and ultimate tragedy of the early 1960s. Whether their relationships were exactly as rumored may never be known for certain, but the emotional impact of their triangle and its tragic conclusion remains a powerful reminder of how fame, power, and love can combine in ways that destroy the very people they're supposed to elevate. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to know that even the most glamorous lives can hide the deepest pain, and that mental health struggles affect people regardless of their fame or success. Have you ever found yourself caught between loyalty to different people you care about? Let us know in the comments how you've navigated complex relationships when there seemed to be no good choices.